All right, everyone. I just started recording. Welcome.
Okay.
Um, got just about noon. I'm sure we're going to have more people joining us as time goes on. Before I let Adam take over and do his inaugural presentation.
Okay.
Obviously, it's still pandemic season. So
Yeah.
hope everybody is doing well. Please mute if you haven't for now until we get to questions and stuff later. Upcoming events for the Baltimore Babe Ruth chapter for next month, November already. We're going to have Maxwell Cates do a presentation the first Wednesday of the month. I will be doing a presentation for next month's Called Shot Lunch, Wednesday of the month. The big announcement is December 2nd, the first Wednesday of December. We are going to have Josh Gibson's great-grandson do a presentation. It'll actually be done via the Josh Gibson Foundation. We'll still send out the information, but you're going to have to sign up through Eventbrite. And Sean Gibson is going to talk about his legacy and why his name should be on the MVP trophy and stuff like that. Then we're going to have another presentation the 2nd December, which I believe is the 9th. An author from the New York City chapter, and then our last Called Shot lunch of the year in December. We'll just have kind of a free-for-all holiday virtual party type of thing. So of course, all this will be coming out in email blasts, and we will have our next newsletter should come out first week of November. I'm actually at my law office today, which is rare. And so I'm going to turn it over to Adam, who is joining us from Alexandria. He's a relatively new SABR member. Primary chapter is Bob Davids, of course, but he's on our roster as well. And he reached out to me back in August or September.
Yeah.
His presentation. So I will let him introduce himself. You guys should be able to see his screen. Everybody could mute. I'll let him take over, and we'll take it. Go ahead, Adam.
Okay. Well, thank you, Peter. And thanks to the Babe Ruth chapter for having me today. As Peter mentioned, I'm a fairly new member of SABR. I joined this summer. I've lived in the Washington area for almost my whole life. So my existence predates our, for the moment, world champion Washington Nationals by some 34 years. And I've been a baseball fan all my life. I went to my first professional games in Baltimore at the old Memorial Stadium. And during the pandemic, I think like a lot of you and like a lot of other people connected with the hobby, I started to look back at baseball cards. You know, since we're all at home, it's hard for us to get together, hard to go to shows, how to go to places. So I think we turned back to our hobbies. And another great interest that I've had for my whole life is the fine arts. And it got me thinking about what the relationship is between baseball cards and the way that they're designed and the kinds of artistic motifs that you see in them. So this talk is about bringing those things together. And I'm presenting it as kind of a thought piece for some work that I've been doing. I've been doing a lot of writing since the summer, and would love to just have your thoughts and ideas either here or offline. I'll have my contact information at the end of the deck, and I'd really look forward to your thoughts. So why don't we get started? Feel free to interrupt me at any time too with questions or comments. So the premise and introduction is you know, why look at baseball cards, and who am I to do that as well? So my intent here is I'm not an art historian. I'm not a baseball historian. I'm just a baseball fan who loves art, does research for a living, and believes in the interconnectedness of things. So when we collect our cards, we're not doing that in a vacuum. The main thesis behind this talk is that baseball cards are relics of popular culture and art and design. Hold on a second, I just need to turn something down here. So I'm just gonna go on mute. Colette, can you turn that down for a minute, please? Thanks. No, Colette, I'm talking. You need to turn it down, please. Okay. Thanks. Okay, sorry about that, everybody. So my intent is to start a conversation about what baseball cards really mean and how to explore things that we see in the culture around us and how they affect this one little corner of the sporting world. I gave a version of this talk to my undergraduate college literary society, the Philomathian Society, about this topic in September. And they gave some really great feedback and questions. So I want to thank them as well, in addition to the Babe Ruth chapter. And also just a little disclaimer, the images of cards that I'm using here are just for the purpose of this educational and research discussion. And they're used in the spirit of fair use. So let's start with the basics. I'll just go through this really quickly. I think we can all agree that baseball is the American national pastime. Its early history is murky, but its origins seem to be between roughly the 1840s and the 1870s, with the first professional team established in Cincinnati in 1869. And I think what's important here is that baseball cards are descended from other collectible cards and ephemera that are printed on heavier stock and packaged with small goods like tobacco and chewing gum. So even if you go to some card shops, you can see other kinds of cards that are collectible that might have everything from different kinds of roosters to other athletes or events or activities. So it really is not limited to baseball cards. Topps began packaging cards with bubblegum in the 1920s. And what's so interesting about that marketing is that it was marketed both as a treat for kids and a digestive for adults. So that's just such a really interesting dimension in terms of the marketing of gum and the idea that what we see now as something very collectible and a hobby really came about as almost like a loss leader strategy for marketing another product. Art versus design, I think, is another really important thing to touch on here. And it's a tricky subject because it's very subjective, easy to debate. And arguing that specific artists have been influenced by other artists or artistic movements is hard to prove unless you have an artist saying or a creator saying, well, yes, I was influenced by, this person or this movement. So I would never want to overstate that. But that said, we can at least assume that as objects of design, cards are and can be inspired by existing artistic or design elements. So the basic premise here is that baseball cards are artifacts of popular culture. And on the one hand, we can look to the players themselves and see how their design and visual elements like their uniforms, their tattoos, their hairstyles, that are visual elements that change with a culture. But there are also elements about the card design itself that change with the culture. I spoke to Kristen Spangenberg, who's the director of prints at the Cincinnati Art Museum that has done some baseball exhibitions. And her take on it are any kind of print is a record of visual culture and literacy, and that there's a very fine line, but still a hierarchy between pop culture and fine art. One of the interesting things that she said as well is her museum and museums in general find it hard to get into collecting ephemera because the volume of them is so high, and it's really hard for them to prioritize, well, what should we curate and have in our collection and what shouldn't we? I think another really good example of that is the baseball card collection at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Burdick collection, which some of you might be familiar with. The reason why they have that collection is that Jefferson Burdick gave it to them, and the condition that they set was that Burdick would actually be the one to catalog it because their staff didn't have the time to do it. I just think that's a great story. So let's look at baseball cards, art and design, and the relationship between all of them. So baseball cards reflect design and technology changes. And what you see here is since the 50s, since that first top set in 1952, you see changes in technology that have affected the way cards are created and designed. So in the 50s and 60s, four color printing became a lot cheaper. Pantone standardized color palettes, so it became a lot easier to mass produce something like a baseball card. In the 60s to the 80s, high-speed photography became popular and cheap, so that the photos moved from being more posed and staged to actual in-game photos, kind of like that Mike Trout card that you see on the right. And pop art impacts visual design. So you see that 1972 card with Hank Aaron. In the 1980s to the present, digital printing has really exploded, which has made it easier for a company like Topps to produce more sets, higher quality stock, finishes, and a digital experience. So now there are actually electronic baseball cards that are collectible, tradable, and it's all done in apps and a digital experience that I think is really just starting to be explored now. Likewise, artistic movements influence design. So 1950s and before, realism, which was a continuous presence since the mid 19th century, you see that reflected in the 1952 set, which is all paintings and some 1950s sets too. Color field painting, you see reflected in kind of the background design of a lot of that card, of a lot of those cards, that 1972 set. 1960s and 70s pop art. I think you see both pop art influencing the cards, also in that 1972 set, but you also see the cards influencing the art. And I think the best example of that is this Pete Rose, Andy Warhol, that the Cincinnati Museum of Art actually acquired. It was purchased for them by a Cincinnati collector right around the time that Pete Rose broke Ty Cobb's record. And he did it because he wanted that in the collection. He wanted some kind of reflection, both of Warhol and pop art and baseball in their museum. In the 1980s and later, on the one hand, we have this kind of digital augmented reality involvement, but we also have the embrace of craft. And I included here a card from a guy named Optimus Volts, who takes vintage baseball cards and paints them. Sometimes they're more representational than others. He uses a lot of Mexican Dia de los Muertos themes in them, but it's really interesting how he does it. And there's an online community of creators and painters who work in this. So I wanted to finish with some examples of 20th century artists and their influence in design, where you can kind of see them reflected in baseball cards. And again, it's hard to make this connection explicitly. One of the things I'd love to talk about with this group or other groups is given something like the Topps Project 2020, which is an initiative that they have to take 20 current artists and have them reimagine 20 vintage cards. Where did they get their influences, and what motivated them to want to work on this project? I've tried to reach out to Topps. I haven't had any luck with that yet, but I'd really like to pull on that thread a little bit more. So some examples that we see here, they all, if you look at them, they all are very kind of graphical. They're big on sort of geometric feels and shapes and images. So I just want you to encourage you to bear that in mind. Romer Bearden lived from 1911 to 1988 in New York, Pittsburgh, and Paris. He had a long and prolific career as a Black artist, and actually you see a lot of his paintings in DC especially. An interesting tidbit about him is he pitched on the Lincoln University baseball team near Philadelphia and was offered a roster spot with the Phillies if he was willing to pass as white. And of course, he didn't want to do that. So that led him to a long artistic career. Stuart Davis, I think you really see reflected in a lot of modern art and design. It's very figurative, it's very geometric, a lot of really bright colors, heavily influenced by jazz, and did a lot of public art. And especially if you look at the Topps 2020 collection, you see a lot of that reflected, I would argue. And again, it may be a direct influence, it may not be a direct influence, but it's part of the culture and it's there. And finally, of course, Andy Warhol started his career in advertising, actually. And he was commissioned by Carl Solway, who was that Cincinnati art dealer, to create this Pete Rose painting. But I don't think there are many 21st century artists who would not think of Andy Warhol as someone who was really, part of the culture and who's reflected in all kinds of graphic design, all kinds of advertising, all kinds of visuals, but he's there as part of the zeitgeist too. So current direction, ways art is influencing card design. I mentioned Project 2020 before. Topps's motivation in this, as far as I can tell so far, is to strengthen the relationship between Topps and the artistic community. So this is very clearly a corporate and commercial approach. But it's very, very interesting what they've done, because you have some artists that are very representational. This fellow, I think his name, it's not Grotesque. I'm sorry, I'll have to look up this particular one. But what I like about him is there is a complete absence of typography. And so all of the lettering and words and text on the cards is replaced by geometric elements, but you still know that it's a card. You still know that it's Ken Griffey Jr. You still know that he played for the Mariners and what his name is, and that it's a Topps card. So that's just such an interesting approach. And at the other extreme, you have someone like Optimus Volts. His name is Isaac Coronado. He lives in Los Angeles, and he hand paints these cards with a Dios de los Muertes theme. I really like this one because it reminds me almost of a Jackson Pollock painting. And so in terms of discussion and questions, few things I'd look at here. One would be, we've only talked so far about the front side of the card, but what can we say about the reverse? And just in my kind of cursory look at this, I do a lot of data visualization and analysis in my day job, but how have changing design and data visualization concepts changed the way information appears on the back side of the card? What I would love to do is do a really in-depth analysis using analytics tools like regular expressions, things like that, to see how the actual wording has changed. Has the text become more complex or less complex? What kinds of topics are discussed? And so my real question here, going forward is, does the chapter have any recommendations or thoughts on what other threads we can pull on? And what do you want to know about design elements or artistic trends that are reflected in card design? So with that, I wanted to say thank you to Peter and the chapter. Here's my contact information. This session is being recorded. I'd love to answer your questions, and I'd love to share this deck with you as well. So feel free to email me and I'll get in touch with you. But at that point, I can stop sharing and would love to invite discussion.
Guys, questions, comments? Make sure you turn off your microphone if you're going to ask a question.
I'll ask a quick question. Did you go into the values of these baseball cards and which ones had the most value and least value, which kept their values over the years?
That's a really good question. I didn't. I was purely taking the artistic perspective, but I think that would be a really interesting thread to pull on. My hypothesis would be that there isn't a relationship between the artistic themes and the value, because it seems like value is more a reflection of the scarcity of the card. But I think that would be an interesting thing to look at. Yeah, does anyone around the table have thoughts about that?
I've got another question for you. So the top series, you just showed the one where the artists are doing the different versions of it. I know I've looked at them on Tops and they're relatively pricey for individual cards. Do you think they're worth it? I'm not necessarily even saying for value down the road, but there's some that I really liked. I ordered one Cal Ripken, but I'm like, on eBay I can find them a little bit cheaper because they buy them in bulk and sell them, I guess. But do you think it's worth it?
I think it's hard to say right now, because any kind of collectible like that, and we're not in the 90s, right, where you could sell your collection and buy a house with it. So I think we're kind of past that time. The sense I have generally is during the pandemic, the hobby has recovered a bit. And so for the first part of the year, there was huge interest in Project 2020, but there were very serious supply chain problems. They couldn't get enough cases to be able to send the cards out, because one reason why they're $20 each is they come in a special case. And those cases had to be ordered from China, and there were very serious delays in getting them. So whereas Topps promised shipment within about, I think they said 3 to 5 weeks, it took months for some people to get their cards. And so a lot of these eBay resellers had bought them in bulk, thinking they would be able to resell them, and they weren't able to do that when they were promised. So you saw some cards go from that kind of $20 retail value to $3, and some of them you can find on eBay for just a few dollars. It depends on the number that they were printed. It depends on the popularity of the player. So the Mike Trout cards might have had something like 70,000 copies that were printed, lesser value. The ones that were more scarce because they have only 1,500 or 2,000 cards printed would be higher value. And there's also a little bit of a segmentation, because you can spend a couple $100 and have one of them signed by the artist. And that, of course, enhances the value. So I would say the same thing about any other collectible, which is if it's worth something to you, then it's worth something. But I'm not counting on getting a significant return from any of these. But there are a few that I've bought. I probably have about 20 of them. And I think that I may be done right now. Because I like a lot of them just esoterically. I like them just as visuals, to collect, and other cards. But I might have a couple of them that have appreciated somewhat, but they appreciate a lot in a marketplace like eBay. They could also go down in a marketplace like eBay.
Have you been buying them because you like the baseball player, or because you like that artist?
I think because I like the artistry of that particular card. And some of them are more successful than others. So the one that I showed you, the Ken Griffey, I just think that's such an interesting artistic approach. That it's taking the visual elements on the card and it's rendering them in a way that where it's totally excluding the text. And I'm someone who thinks a lot about design, because in my work, I'm an analytics lead at the National Library of Medicine, at the National Institutes of Health. And so we develop tools for our staff to help them track customer experience for the different products that they offer. And so the way things are designed is really important. So I think a lot about, and my team thinks a lot about, what are we saying where, and what does it, what does it look like? What does it say? So, I collect them because I'm interested in the visual artistry and elements. F. Dot is, he's another artist. I can't remember where he's located, but his approach is almost the exact opposite, where thematically he includes a lot of neat visual elements in a card. So he did one of Dwight Gooden wearing a mask. And his original thinking was, well, who was Dwight Gooden? His name was Doc, so I'm going to put a hospital mask on him. Well, this year that has a different kind of resonance. So that was a card that was very popular. There's another guy, Keith Shore, who is the in-house artist for a beer company, McKellar. And I mentioned Stuart Davis before. There seems to be a direct line between Stuart Davis's work and his, because it's very simple, almost like cartoony characters, and it is really jazzy, bright colors and imagery and shapes. So that's another one that I find really interesting. There was another question. There are a number of companies that have produced cards. Are there significant artistic differences among the different companies? That's a really good question. I haven't seen any. Are you familiar with Pacific Trading Cards? I'm not. I think it would be interesting, though, to talk to art directors at different companies. And I'm thinking more, not so much of the photography as the kind of visual elements around the outside of the card or on the back. I'm not that familiar with Pacific, but...
I'm the one that asked that. I have a box here with the whole collection. There's 220 cards in. I don't remember at all where I got them.
Mm-hmm.
I know I wouldn't have bought them. I collected years ago and then sold my collection. And maybe they were a promotional thing from a show. I don't know if you can see. I got one here.
Mm-hmm. Right. Oh, nice. Mm-hmm.
A lot of them are Hall of Famers, and a lot of them are with the Ed Crane pool. I can show you the back.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't know if you knew anything about these or not.
It seems like it's not as prevalent now, I think, because the hobby's become a lot more kind of corporate, and a lot of those cards that maybe would have been produced by a smaller company like Pacific, or I can remember getting Yankee cards from Burger King.
Oh, yeah.
That they were handing out when I was in college, and now those cards might be digital. And I think the really interesting thing is the graphic design that's done online, or that is now done online, used to be done on drafting tables. And so a card like that is something where, they could have gotten a promotional site from somewhere, and they could have had a graphic designer work on it pretty easily. And the barriers to entry for printing a card like that would have been pretty low, because you could have just gone to a print shop and done it.
Yeah, I noticed that the copyright date on the back is 1989.
1989, okay.
Yeah.
And taking advantage of the growth in the hobby then, too.
And there's Red Shane James, Mickey Mantle, Ken Boyer, Al Dark.
Oh, wow.
So
yeah, that's
variation of a bunch of players like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mark.
Adam, as far as I know, the Pacific trading cards don't have much value, but I don't know why. Maybe there were a lot of them printed. They're not bad looking cards though. So if you have them and you like the images and what they have on the back, that's still a value to you, the individual, but I'm pretty sure they have little value.
Yep.
Now, back in the 50s, I don't know if you can see these.
Oh, yeah.
Mickey Mantle, Willie Mays, another Mickey Mantle snuck in there. Well, anyway, I think back then, because we didn't have 24/7 ESPN, and we didn't get to see Willie Mays on TV hardly ever in a highlight or anything, or a Mickey Mantle. The only person we saw on TV, a player, was our home team, and even then there was limited coverage of our teams back then. So I'm just wondering if the purpose of cards has really changed a lot too. And this whole artistic idea you're talking about makes a lot of sense now to me in the current day. Whereas in the earlier day, it was just these simple designs with the easy to read card backs.
Mm-hmm.
And Adam, what we did back then is we memorized these statistics like you wouldn't believe. And any
Right.
personal data on those cards was all embedded in here. It's amazing to me how many people I know from my time period that did that. But I like the Ken Griffey card you showed. I think that was takeoff on the 89 tops, isn't it? Or
It
something
was,
like,
yeah.
or 90, 1990,
Yeah.
one of those. But yeah, I think the cards were more central to our learning if we were 10 or 12 years old, what we were learning
Mhm.
about the players and the teams back then. Between the cards and the newspapers, that was our main thing. And maybe a few people had a baseball encyclopedia, but now there's so much there, Google and elsewhere,
Mhm.
that maybe cards are more of a wide open artistic kind of thing that you could get into, for instance, like you're talking about, and come up with a lot of variations that people would really enjoy for that reason. So
Mhm.
it looks like a good idea to me to keep pursuing. But
Yeah.
that's how we used to use cards.
No, that's so interesting, Mark, because the Topps has an app, a digital collecting app, and what's on the reverse of those cards is what I would call really simple data visualization. So it'll actually give you, if you had a year's worth of statistics or a career's worth of statistics on the back of, say, Brooks Robinson's card in 1961 that you could memorize, this actually has graphics on the back. So you can actually see, I don't remember what date off the top of my head, but it'll show you bar charts on the back in ways that a typical card wouldn't. And I think that speaks both to what you're talking about, which is we have so much data at our fingertips now, but to also we want to interact with it.
Right.
Which is
Neat.
really
That
interesting.
sounds good to me.
Thanks.
Adam, I got a question. Over the years, Topps has brought back late 19th, early 20th century icons such as Allen and Ginter, T205, T206. They had Gallery, Upper Deck at one time, did Goodwin. What are your thoughts of Topps and when Upper Deck had the license for baseball of bringing back iconic card designs put in modern day sets?
I think, well, first of all, one of the artistic themes that I uncovered more recently is the move back to kind of older or more archival approaches. So realism never went away, right? Painting's never gone away, and you can go to photography shows and see photographers who work in sepia tones and things like that. So that's always been a current in the art world. And the idea that for, cards that we would go back to both things that have worked before and also interpret kind of old wine in new bottles. So I love how Topps has done that with the T206 set. And I love those cards from, say, the teens and the 20s, where it's just a painted image of the player against just a color field background, like a bright green or a black-red background. That's just such an elegant presentation, and I'm almost surprised that we don't go back to that too. T206 is kind of like that, but this was a larger format. And I just, it says a lot, I think, about us as a culture too, that we go back to things that have an elegance and a resonance before. And it probably helps as a story too, that, everyone can point to that Honus Wagner card and say, well, yeah, this one, if you can find a pristine one, that's worth millions of dollars.
Yeah, to comment further, what I've liked about the Allen and Ginter set, it's not just the what they did in the 19th century was not only they incorporated baseball and the star athletes and pop culture of that day, but I've also liked and why they continue to be, why they have that successful brand in that Allen and Ginter's, that they also incorporate the same thing. They incorporate the top athletes of people in pop culture in addition to baseball. So I like the way that Topps in some sort of way has revived that a little bit, because look, they brought back, they did Heritage. Bowman, for which was one of their flagship brands, did that as well.
Right.
You mentioned about card backs just a few moments ago. What were your thoughts going on the backs of cards, which had artwork done, and I believe it was a subject of a Topps baseball card blog recently. What are your thoughts of the evolution of art on the back of a baseball card from when they started in the 1950s through, whenever they eventually stopped that?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I think there are a couple of ways to approach it. One would be to look at how the visuals and the design get handled. So is it a cartoon approach? How are the data presented and how are they highlighted and what statistics get tracked over time is really interesting. There's one set, an old Bowman set that I found where it actually, it predates interleague play. So it will show the players' statistics against every team in their league, which if you wanted to do that now, you couldn't have it on a typically sized baseball card because the print would be too small if they're playing against 30 teams.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the cards I think you're thinking of, because I know in the late 80s, early 90s, Bowman, when Topps brought back Bowman, they did have those head-to-head stats,
Right.
for the pitching and the hitting. So I don't know if that's what you were thinking of, or you were thinking of an earlier version of Bowman.
No, I think I'm thinking of that one. I'm thinking of that Bowman revised set. Yeah. Yeah. So I think the other way to go about it is you can look at the visuals and the design, but you can also analyze the text as well. And that would be a project because on a set level, you would have to somehow scan or input all of the data from the back of every card. So you think about 500 or 600 cards with different kinds of data on the back of each card. And I'm not smart enough about data science to know the best way to go about that. But you could. I mean, you could create an Excel chart, I think, that would have a cell for each data field, and you could key in what each data field had in it, and then do a text level analysis with that. And I think that could be really, really interesting. How much information is on the card, how many lines, how much text in sort of the upper biographical part compared to the other part, what kinds of data are discussed. So, is it personal stuff? Is it where they were educated? Is it where they played before? What kinds of information is in there? What keywords get used? Could be really interesting, actually. So, yeah. Great. Anybody else?
Questions, comments, anyone? Any questions? If not for Adam, any SABR related questions?
I got one more.
Steve, go ahead.
Adam, you mentioned about electronic cards in terms of form electronics, done electronically. What do you see as the future of cards? Because we're seeing, virtual reality in
Right.
as ways. So, and you mentioned earlier as far as apps and Topps in the early 2000s had Topps cards. What do you, as from an artistic point of view, what do you see as the future of baseball cards and card collecting going forward?
I think that's a really important question to ask, not just for this particular area, but across all kinds of media. And I think as much as we're asking it right now about baseball cards, you can ask the same question about journalism, filmed entertainment, news, pretty much anything in media, and even the way we work. I had a really interesting conversation with a baseball card committee a few months back, and we were talking a little bit about apps. And one of the things that came out of that conversation is this idea of virtual and augmented reality. So if you have an app that right now, what you see on, say, the Topps app is a digital representation of a physical card. And they can come out with all kinds of sets, as I was talking about with Mark a few minutes ago. The backs have kind of more interactive data and stats on them. I think the innovation for them right now is that they can come out with a new set at the top of a hat, at the drop of a hat rather. So if World Series is happening right now, they released a new World Series set before the game last night. 56 cards in it, and they may have created that over the weekend. And technically it's easy to do. You develop a template, you digitize it, and you get whatever photography you want to have in those cards, and boom, you have a set of 56 cards that's now released to however big your audience is. The next step from that is probably some kind of augmented reality. So if you have a Clayton Kershaw card, or a Randy Johnson card, well, what if you could create an augmented reality experience where you hold your phone up or you put on your virtual reality glasses and you feel like you're taking a pitch from Clayton Kershaw or Randy Johnson or Walter Johnson, and you actually feel like you're standing in at the box, and you can have that experience. So that's potentially where something like that could go. And it sounds like the software development skill that's needed to do that is not that complicated that a company like Topps couldn't hire someone to do it for them. So it's more a question of, do we want to make the investment in doing that, and do we think there's an audience for it? And probably there would be. I mean, if you wanted to pay, say, $6 to Topps for their augmented reality app to be able to do that, is that an experience that people would pay for? So that's potentially where it could go. And I think what's most interesting about this is some of it is old wine in new bottles, and some of it is new wine in new bottles, to borrow a different expression.
So Adam, have you looked at cards over the years from Topps in even a cursory way, and started to decide for yourself which designs you liked more than others, and why or why not, front or back, especially front? Have you done a little bit of that too?
I have. I try to keep it, I try to be as objective as I can be when I talk about it. But yeah, I have some aesthetics that I really like. The 1989 Topps set I like because there's something that's very kind of vintagey about it. The 1999 set with a gold border, they really haven't done anything like that since, and I felt like that was a really elegant presentation, and the cards were really glossy. But I think it's interesting that they haven't done it before or since. The 1961 set, if you remember that Brooks Robinson card that I showed, where it's the player picture and then a yellow box with the team name and
Right.
an orange colored. So I look at that and I see Piet Mondrian, the Dutch artist who was part of this whole color field theme in painting. And that's just so interesting to me because a graphic designer obviously came up with that. But it wouldn't surprise me. And again, we don't have that graphic artist here to ask the question. But I see a link between the two of those. So I like that set a lot as well. I'm someone who just generally appreciates good design and the visual appeal of something. So those are ones that kind of come up for me. The 1990 top set, I think that's the one that looks almost like a comic book. It's very, very 90s. My favorite card in my collection is the 1990 Bernie Williams' rookie card. And in that set where the inner border is Yankee colors, so blue and white or silver, but the outer border is really garish. It's green and yellow. So not colors you associate with the Yankees at all. You associate it with the A's. And, that to me is now it's very dated.
Yeah.
But,
I'm very interested in what someone your age has to say about 50s and 60s cards, because I don't know how much of the design of those cards from year to year, in my case, is the appeal of them, pro and con, is affected. I don't know how much of my liking of it is related to the memories those cards evoke and or collecting those cards back then. And whereas someone like you who's younger might have a more subjective, way of looking at the design and just evaluating it, I think. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because you're getting into what fandom's about. Right. And so when you look at a card that's of a favorite player, what emotions does that evoke for you? And, is it, well, I really like this card and I like the aesthetics of it and the visuals of it. So the 1956 set, somewhere I was looking at some website where that was voted the most beautiful set of all time. And because a lot of them are, that one. So a lot of them are horizontally formatted, and the painting is beautiful, and the colors, really pop. And that's very evocative of a certain period in time as well. I look at players. So like I grew up with Cal Ripken. I grew up in a later part of my life with Derek Jeter. And like I'm talking with my son about Derek Jeter and how great Derek Jeter was, and I used to see him play, and my son's first question, he's 13, and we probably had this conversation when he was about 10, was, is Derek Jeter still alive? And I was like, yeah, Derek Jeter is still alive. He just retired last year. So but I tell that story because these things resonate in different ways, and for me, to see a Cal Ripken card evokes not just his career and when he broke Lou Gehrig's record, but it evokes those afternoons spent at Memorial Stadium when I was really small with my parents, and that that was an experience that I remember, and that every year we would go to Baltimore at least once and we would see Cal Ripken play.
Yeah. We had a great element of surprise each year in the 50s and 60s that we don't have now, where you'll see the design on the computer of the new card maybe first. But in those days, if you didn't see a friend's card in March when it first came out, you heard they were in the store, you walked up to the store and you opened your first pack each year. And it was very exciting to see the new design of that year's issue. So that was pretty neat. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Adam, I wanted to ask you, we talked about American baseball cards. Have you ever taken a look at Japanese baseball cards? Because especially some of the older cards incorporate the style of art that people who are familiar with Japanese art are known for. Have you had a chance to look at that or even have an opinion on it?
Oh, wow. Not for a long time, but there was, that's a really interesting thread to pull on too. I've just looked at American ones here, but years ago, I did some work in grad school about Japanese baseball, and there was a book that came out. I think it was called something like "You Gotta Have Wa," So it came out in the late 90s. And I remember that a lot of the visuals around the Japanese game look like old woodblock prints. And that's, that's a big, a big, part of baseball there. So I think that's a really interesting thing to look at. Yeah, I'm going to check that out. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome.
Sure.
Going back to those cards, my name is Francis Kinlaw. My wife, my screen says Francis and Shirley. I'm going back to the cards that Mark mentioned and you mentioned a few minutes ago, mid-50s, 1956 set. I think my favorite set was one of the first that I remembered, and it was 1954 Topps. And as far as I recall, that's the only one that had an actual artistic design and a photograph. And it's always been one of my favorites. And I listening to you, I started thinking why, and wondering why. And I think it may be that photograph in the background that accompanied the artistic design. But I always liked the 54 Topps set a great deal. I also like the 55, 56, and all those. But if I had to pick one, I think the 54 might be my favorite.
Yeah, because it's all part of the experience. And I loved hearing yours and Mark's stories too about, hearing from your friends, okay, the set is in. And so now we've got to go to the store and we might, we'll be able to see players that we don't usually get to see because we don't have MLB Network. We don't have ESPN. We don't have, internet.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Great
Those
stuff.
are definitely a different thing. Mark, where were you when you were growing up? Were you in a city? I was in a rural area, North Carolina. So, that was, there was one store that even had the cards.
Well, I was a native Baltimorean, but when I was 6, I moved to a suburb of Boston for 6 years. And so I was there from 57 to 62. And this Fleer set came out while I was there. It was all Ted Williams, Adam. It was maybe roughly 70 card, I can't remember, set of Ted Williams' career and his life. His playing career was almost over in 59. But yeah, my early years with baseball cards were in Boston. And then to top it off, I was lucky enough to move back to Baltimore in 63 and just watch Brooks Robinson in person. So how could you do better than that,
Right.
So,
Oh, that's great.
Yep.
Yeah.
Adam, I'm partial to, there were a couple sets before my time that I was a little partial to art, visually. There was the 1967 set, which didn't have you just had the name of the top, you had the team name on the bottom, it was mostly photographed.
Right.
When you go into the 70s, the 1972 set, the Hank Aaron card that you showed was, like I said, when I started collecting 72s, I just was blown away by how colorful it was. It was not just a photography, but the surrounding side. It almost had a late 60s, early 70s psychedelic approach to it. But in terms of, when I was growing up in the 1980s, cards like, and I'll bring this up as an example, because there was a 5 and dime near where I lived, about maybe half a mile, and I would go there, and I started building a 1983 set before my parents said, we'll buy you the whole set as it is because it may take a little too long to get it. So this 1983 card of Jim Eisenreich, the card where it brings back sort of the way the 1963 design, where it had the player and it had the little picture inside. But I think the card that set into the design that set to the modern era was the 1989 Upper Deck. I think that, to me, really set the tone for how we see how cards are produced nowadays. We have a high-end photography, and nothing is more iconic than a #1 card of Ken Griffey Jr. And he just lived up to his billing, which I think makes it even more appealing. What are your thoughts on that?
Oh, about the 1990 Upper Deck specifically?
Not just that, but just in general, the 67 tops,
Yeah.
just from a visual point of view.
Mm-hmm.
From those.
I like the 1967 tops. The 71 set is also really interesting graphically, because I feel like it's a very clean, very 1970s look, and that's very evocative for me too, because I was born in 1972. So those are the cards that I probably would have collected if I had been born a few years earlier than I was. And I mean, to me, it's in terms of, you know, what do you like? That's such a subjective thing. So are you a purist, or do you like things that kind of are linked to the design trends at the time?
Me, I'm just a little. It depends, because I like to draw. I like that stuff, and I think the one things I learned over the years, because I've collected for as long as I can remember, it's just that the visually, what Topps is so good at is coming up with these different designs year after year, and I think in sort of a way, vintage, as you said earlier, in some sort of way is coming back, because they got Topps archives, for example, bringing back a new approach and bringing back, you know, photos. Because I remember an article 15 years ago that Keith Olbermann wrote about in Beckett about going into its Topps archives and just how vast and how immense there are. I think it speaks to that Topps is still the king in that department, but over the years before they stopped doing it, it's just how other companies caught up in that department. And it's just that, I don't know how you see it visually, but how do you see as far as those things go? Sorry if I rambled.
Yeah, well, it's the growth of digital publishing, and the idea that you know, if I have design software, I can design a baseball card. If I market that and I do it, yeah, I'd probably run afoul of MLB's IP people, but the barriers to entry are a lot lower. So on the one hand, you have a company like Topps that has that huge history and repository and archive of things that they've done and that they own. But on the other hand, you have this cottage industry, really. And if you go onto Twitter and you go onto eBay, you can find people who are basically designing their own cards, which is really appealing and interesting to me, because it's democratizing the art. I've even tried it a couple times where I've taken an old card and I've painted them on my own with acrylics. And so I took a Bert Blyleven card and I made it into a Van Gogh card of him, you know, coming off the pitching rubber, because both of them were Dutch. So, you know, the fact that we can do that is really appealing, and that we can take that kind of, you know, mass-produced thing and augment it and make it our own, using either very high technology where we're redesigning it using Adobe or, you know, InDesign or Photoshop or something like that, or we're actually interacting with it and painting on it as a canvas. That the opportunities are wide open.
Interesting.
So does that answer your question, Stephen?
Yeah, in a certain degree, because you mentioned about democratizing, because Topps has something on their website that if you pay them a certain amount, you give them a picture and you can incorporate that on any of a random design. Gary Sierdowski, who does his Infinite Baseball card set, is also a guy who dabbles into the fine arts, and I think he has something in his shop or something like that, where if you give him a picture, he can design design a card with statistics on the back. I don't know if that's something going on the lines what you're saying is, but yeah, you're right, because I find it interesting that on the internet you have people who are quote unquote designing their own cards based off of Topps designs and maybe getting a little creative on their ends.
Yeah, or based on their own design. They're not necessarily limiting it to what Topps does. But the idea is we want to make this representation of something, and we take the baseball card as, again, an artifact of popular culture, and create something that's new, interesting, and relevant. So,
Going back to the evoking of memories that cards can have, I was just thinking that I wonder if anybody on this call has any favorite set that is not within about 3-year period of when they started collecting. Because I've always thought that's what really determines the popularity of a set, is when you start coming of age in a baseball sense and collecting, and then you stick with that as that brings back memories, and that is the set I like best. I wondered if anybody varies from that, other than perhaps Adam, an art critic, or someone who knows a great deal about it. But I don't think of it as much as a personally. I don't think of it as much as when I look at a baseball card. I don't look at the art aspect as much as what the memories it brings back.
I think to answer Francis' question, I like the 72. I collect the 72 set. I'm almost done that. And I think what I liked about the 72 set, amongst those things, was that at that time it was the largest Topps set they ever made. And to answer Francis' question, that predated my first baseball card. That predated when I started heavily getting into baseball cards. But for me, I think my 72 Topps baseball, I think in some sort of way answers Francis's question. To ask you a question, Adam, card wrappers. Over the years, Topps had made wrappers and the artwork on there. What are your thoughts on baseball card wrappers, especially especially the artwork that went into it?
Really, that's a really interesting question too. I think my initial response would be, well, that's your advertising, that's your call to action. And in some ways, the wrappers have really changed, first of all, from it used to be a wax pack, and now it's a Mylar pack that you actually have to tear open. And it used to be this wax pack that you would it had a little spot of glue on it and you would kind of unfold it. And of course, it's become higher value, higher quality of printing, more images, and things like that. So I think I would say that speaks to the changes in the hobby, really. And Topps is certainly, a lot of the card companies have gone to more elaborate forms of retail packaging too. So I haven't looked at that a whole lot, but it would be an interesting thing to study, no doubt. Yeah.
I haven't seen much difference between the recent Topps wax pack look and the ones from, say, the 60s. I forgot what the ones in the 60s look like, Adam, but you can pull them up on eBay and they show you what a wax pack looked like in 66 or 63. Right. And if you look at them now, maybe I'm getting mixed up with the heritage packs and Topps. Maybe those are more of the look like the 50s and 60s wax packs. And it just answered Francis' question. I do think a lot of my favorite cards, fortunately or unfortunately, are mired in those sets that I first collected when I was a kid, although there's some exceptions. And I think even when I was 16, I only had a few cards that I bought because by then I guess you're thinking that's not the thing for a 16-year-old, but then you're thinking, yeah, I want to get some of those. And where I'm going with that is I like the 67 top set, even, 5 years or so after the primary cards I was collecting, the one you mentioned, I like the design of that one, front and back, easy to read back and that kind of thing.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I don't know which thing I would prefer, the Ken Griffey card that you showed us earlier, because I want to try to be progressive thinking about my grandson or whatnot, but the ease on the eyes, say of the 58 tops or the 59 tops, it was so easy to look at those cards on the front. They just wham. And the color background that you were talking about, the simple color background.
Yeah.
As a child, maybe 8 or 9 years old, it was very appealing to me. And then the 59 tops, Adam, had the very easy to read back, which to me is a big deal. That light background where you could really read everything on the back easily. So to the extent, at least on the backs, they stick with something like that and don't go with a 71 tops back, that I didn't like their backs too much, or even maybe 72 tops. The backs are really hard to read.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and especially when, you want to be memorizing it.
Right.
So it's good to have that be easy. Yeah.
Right.
I have a question. You've been talking a lot about tops. Have you ever heard of Donruss and looked into them?
Yeah, I have. Yeah. I haven't found as many of those, but I think the same principles apply. Yeah.
Here's one.
Yeah.
You see that?
Yeah, I'm familiar with that set too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
About 91 or so, something like that.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, very simple, really clear layout. Yeah.
Yeah, the 84 and 86 Donruss are very appealing. Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the 91 set is interesting because it's predominantly reds and blues in the border, and it's the same border for every card. So, yeah.
Yeah, I noticed some of the tops had the team colors in borders around there, and you usually have two primary colors, and and they put one border one of the colors and the other border the other colors. I thought it was kind of neat.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, team logos seem to be a thing of the past with baseball cards, but in the 50s, Adam, the team logos was on each card, and I liked that for whatever reason.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think they've gotten back to that often. One of the things I always like about looking at vintage ones is seeing how the logos have changed over time. So, having a mid-'80s, say, Chicago White Sox card, which is completely different. Yeah.
Modernized. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And now often the teams will go back to their vintage uniforms and their vintage logos, either as a Sunday thing or sometimes they're just rebranding because they want to reclaim that heritage. So
Donruss was mentioned just a few moments ago, and I saw that 91 Diamond Kings card. What are your thoughts of the Diamond King subset? Because for me, one of the first times that I saw art on the front of a baseball card was those Diamond Kings cards.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts of that? Because it was, like I said, I grew up in the Philadelphia area, and Dick Perez, some of his work found his way on the Hall of Fame postcards. And I remember the Phillies fan growing up, he put his work on some other stuff. What were your thoughts just as far as the Donruss stuff went?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to you see different design trends kind of coming back over time. And if you've got a heritage set where you want to be drawing on that, so you're going to have cards that look more traditional in that sense, and that that are a painting instead of a photograph, and that are posed instead of an action shot. So I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's a very elegant set too. Yeah. Great. Mhm. Great. Yeah, thanks to all of you for a great discussion. This has really been terrific.
Anybody else have any questions for Adam?
Just thanks for the insights.
Yeah, thank you, Adam.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Well, stay in touch, and I'll keep coming to these. I really enjoyed meeting all of you. And don't hesitate to reach out to me on my email or on LinkedIn or your preferred social media. So
Thank you, Adam.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam.
all
Very
right,
good.
thanks everyone.
I'll see you next time. And Saber tells me
next
to
time.
remind everyone, if your memberships are about to expire because the year is coming to an end, they're trying to keep their numbers up. Actually, we're doing better during pandemic than we have in past years in terms of recruitment. So,
Good. Okay. Well, I joined in the summer, so mine will be
Yeah.
up then. but-
some people have 1 year,
Yeah,
somebody have 3 years.
Right.
You should be
Yeah.
getting reminders, whatever email you have for Saber connection.
Okay. Will do.
And so I'll see if those of you, our next one will be November, I think it's the 4th. And we're going to have, if everybody knows Maxwell Cates, he's going to speak about his book that he did a few years ago on expansion.
Awesome.
Peter, will that be, I just want to be sure, is this, will that be a 12 o'clock meeting or a evening?
That'll be an evening,
Okay.
7 o'clock on the 4th, and then 12 o'clock on the, oh boy, on the 18th.
Uh-huh.
So we'll have 2 in November and then 3 in December.
Okay.
A relatively new chapter. We seem to have a lot of meetings.
Well, does anybody want to predict who's going to win the World Series?
Dodgers.
Dodgers.
Dodgers. In
Yeah, I think
6.
so.
Yeah, it sure
Dodgers.
looks like it. I'm a Rays fan, secondary to the Orioles, but yeah, I think the Dodgers are going to be too much for them.
Yeah, and the Nats will come roaring back next year.
Yeah, I think so.
Mhm.
It's been better than nothing having this partial season, that's for sure.
That's true.
Mm.
Hopefully next year we get a full season and we get Saber 50 in and
Right.
make it to the convention.
Yeah, that was a big
Yeah.
disappointment.
So we're
Mhm.
working on trying to get some of the big names to appear. So
Great.
I think I'm the only one on this call. I'm on the planning committee. So
Mhm.
we're doing our best.
Okay.
Thank you
Great.
for that.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right, guys. Well, have a great afternoon. Thank you, Adam, again.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Be on the lookout for emails. Check our Facebook page. One of these days, I'll actually finish the website, hopefully by the end of the 2020. Everybody's, stay safe, stay healthy, and hopefully our
Sure.
will return to normal sooner rather than later. So,
Right.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
all right, guys. Take care.
Everybody.
You
Thank you very
too.
much.
Everybody have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Huh?